So, our speaker tonight first tasted the thrill of political battle as a golfer in the election of 1968. Actually, thinking back now, he's pretty sure that what he was tasting was the adhesive on his lips from the hundreds of mailers that he had licked and sealed in his very important work as an adolescent volunteer. But his active work in politics ended in 1972 when he was a Nixon volunteer on the University of the Wisconsin-Madison campus. Not only was the student HQ on campus the regular target of plastic bags of filth, sadly, but every poster they put up was immediately taken down in less than, 60 seconds? So when he hears about today's political climate being the worst ever, he remembers the polarizing events of the Vietnam War era and has quite a different perspective. Tonight's presentation examines our founder's warning, and we are going to assess how we are doing with a country that generations of Americans have sacrificed to build in this talk tonight, which is entitled A Republic, If You Can Keep It. So please welcome Mr. Keith Preston.
All right. Okay, so couple things. Thank you again, Mrs. McKinney, for that introduction. Couple things came to mind as she was reading that to you, which I had provided their information on. Number one, the campus that I was on, and some of you may or may not remember this, 2 years earlier had been the site of a bombing where a man was killed. Somebody blew up the math building because it was being used by the ROTC. They thought they weren't going to hurt anybody because they did it at night, but a janitor was there and the janitor was killed. And so at that time when I was there, there was a lot of posters that we would also see saying free, and I'm not going to say his name, but free the name of the guy who had done this bombing and who was in jail. And so that's kind of a reminder of just the kind of atmosphere that there was at that time. So again, as I often say to people say, boy, this is the worst political, and don't say that to a history teacher, because they'll tell you, no, it's not. And in this case, it was something I experienced. And the other one is, I was just telling my middle school kids today that when we talk about fractured elections and how the politics of the time and how the country is tearing itself apart, you forget that the two of the founders of this country, Jefferson and Adams, had probably the most violent words that they say. Jefferson said that Adams was a hermaphrodite. And Adams said, that's when the stories first came out, the accusations that Jefferson had spent some time in the slaves' quarters and had progeny that had come out of that union, was in the things that were being thrown at each other in that election. So I just want to edit that little part on the side there. So I've chosen some things here. First of all, that picture on the right is, and that splotch that I look at there, that was on the, that's not on my shirt. But at the Constitution Center in Philadelphia, you go to visit, Independence Hall, and then there's a whole display up there where they have all kinds of things you can see things demonstrated. There's a whole room with all the signers of the Constitution in bronze statues. And I put this one in there, even though it's a little fuzzy, because that's me having a little discussion with Dr. Franklin, who was in his 90s at the time when he's up there giving him information and his best, his advice as to what should happen. So, and then of course, it is from a conversation that at first they used to say was mythic, that someone had asked him something when he came out of the Constitutional Convention. We now have one of the minor characters who had been there had written it down in his letter to someone. So we know that this actually did happen. And supposedly the name of the woman was Mrs. Powell. They weren't sure what her first name was. And Mrs. Powell is saying as he's coming out, well, Dr. Franklin, what kind of government have you given us? And she was kind of mocking a little bit. She was saying, a monarchy? Or he's interrupted her and said, a republic, ma'am. She kind of looked up, if you can keep it. And that's his warning. And that is it. This is the gift that was given us the sacrifices that were made in the Revolution. Of course, the sacrifices have been made by Americans since then. Because that's what makes Americans unique. I was just talking with one of you a little bit before, and it's good to remind ourselves every once in a while, even when it looks contrary to this. We are not a nation of tribes. Every once in a while it feels like that. That's been throughout history. I mean, the worst one is North and South, right? 4 years of civil war, 600,000 dead. But what unites us is more important, and what unites us is the values of this republic. What unites us is our commitment to the law. What unites us is our commitment to the Constitution. And in Abraham Lincoln's case, even more than the Constitution, he felt was the promise of the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. That's what that Civil War was about. So anyway, just wanted to set the tone for it as we're going here. Now, one of the things that we often do, and we hear this, and I will refer to current things that you're hearing in the news, and you hear things, you go, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. So one of the first things I always do when people say, well, you know, we're a democracy, I say, no, we're not. You're not a democracy. And that was intentional. The founders did not want a democracy. Well, wait a minute, shouldn't we, aren't we a democracy? Shouldn't they want a democracy? And I will address that in this presentation. But this is a republic, and that was the decision that was made. And so that's part of what we'll cover in this as we go forward. So a lot of people have chosen to use this little anachronistic comment that Dr. Franklin used outside there to write about. Earl Warren wrote a book, A Republic, If You Can Keep It. The ACLU has said democracy if we can keep it. And once again, I love them on certain issues, but they're wrong on this one. We are not a democracy. Neil Gorsuch, sitting on the Supreme Court before he went on the court, wrote a republic if you can keep it. And most recently, and I've really been enjoying reading this lately, if you've never read anything by Eric Metaxas, he's really written some great stuff. I highly recommend his book on Dietrich Bonhoeffer. It's outstanding. Take the time to read it. A really brave and important person in American history. And so his book is called If You Can Keep It, The Forgotten Promise of American History. All right. So the Constitutional Convention has been going on since May, all throughout the time. One of the things they were really smart about that would never be able to get away with today is not leaking. American government not leaking, but they really did a good job. No one really knew what they were working on. And of course, part of it is they trusted those guys. George Washington's the chairman. Now, you don't have Jefferson and Adams. Most Americans are not aware of that. Adams is busy over being our first ambassador to the court of St. James. That's England. And Jefferson's over there being the ambassador to France. So those two guys are not there. But Jefferson's being kept on board on what's going on by Madison. So Madison and Jefferson are writing letters back and forth to talk about what's going down. So this, what have you given us, the Republic, madam, is important because he knew that Americans were going to be challenged to hold on to this idea, to keep this Republic. The temptations were going to be at some point in time to change it. Now, in those days, your danger was either somebody would institute a monarchy, and that was offered to Washington. And he said, we've just been fighting for the last 7 years to get rid of monarchy. No more King Georges. And so he rejected it. That's what Hamilton wanted to do. He wanted to have a monarchy because the people thought monarchies were stable. You knew who was going to be the next leader of the nation. You didn't have to go through these horrible elections, which Americans kind of feel right now. Holy cow, they never stop. We have an election and we keep going right on to the next one without any pause in the middle, okay? Now, why didn't they want a democracy? And this little cartoon is a little fun example. And for those of you who are watching online, you can't see, it says democracy. And you see two wolves sitting at a table with a lamb. And it said two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. Okay, majority rules. Looks like it's gonna be mutton tonight. And then it says beneath that, and I'm not quite 100% with this, but I get the joke, is liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote, okay? So that's why you don't want a democracy. In a pure democracy, the theory is at least everyone votes on the laws. Madison actually had a fear of the tyranny of the majority, that everything would be majority vote. And the reason that's bad is, guess who owns property and who doesn't own property, and who's going to vote on who's going to have that property. And that's an important thing because we talk again about the Declaration of Independence. Remember, it's life, liberty and what? Pursuit of happiness. But that's not what it originally was. Anybody here know what it originally was? It was property. Exactly. Because they knew that that was your freedom. That was something that you could use to generate your income. That was something you could pass on to your children and your grandchildren. It was property. And all the men that had come over from Europe had come from a world where you weren't able to own property. Whether it was England or Germany or France, most of the property was owned by nobility or the church. You come to America, and as one recent British comedian used to say, he says, "Oh, this is land just for us." Excuse me, who are you? Pretending that it's American, Native Americans. But contrary to popular belief, there was a lot of cooperative nature in that. And so there was plenty of land for you to come over for. And so property was very important, whether that property is your farm, which it was for most people, it was a very agricultural time, or your property was your business. So the idea behind a democracy is you have what we want, so we're all going to vote to take it from you. In a republic, the power of the government is restricted. And that's something that's often forgotten. The idea behind a republic is to restrict the power of government. When I teach the class on the Bill of Rights to the kid, almost every single part of that is Congress shall make no law restricting freedom of religion, restricting freedom of speech, restricting all the different rights that it has in there. They're all restrictions. It's not the government's going to allow you to have these rights. It's the government cannot prevent you from having these rights. The government cannot take away these rights. The government is regulated on the way that it can handle these rights. So in a republic, the power of the government is restricted, and the laws that a republic make should constantly be in a situation of limiting power. You may say, we want to vote to have this good thing done with these billions of dollars, but there should be restrictions in there on the power of the government and what it does with that, okay? And any time it interferes with the rights of the individual, that is something, particularly at the higher levels of law, that the Constitution is looked at. So what's the difference between democracy and a republic? Thomas Jefferson says a democracy is nothing more than mob rule where 51% can take away the rights of the other 49%. That's why he didn't want a democracy. John Adams says, whereas a republic is a government of laws. There are certain things the government cannot do. What we're having a big beef about right now. Everybody is hearing about it on the news, right? We haven't got a Speaker of the House. We haven't got a Speaker of the House. That's okay. We'll figure it out. And believe me, 6 months' time, you'll forget about it. Oh, remember that time we had a problem? Yeah. I mean, at the time that it happened, we had forgotten that we'd gone through this all in January when we first tried to elect the first speaker this year. So the fact of the matter is, you can't run over the people's rights if you're properly keeping that republic. And that's the idea. That's our job as the individuals. We need to let our representatives know if they're interfering with some parts of the republic, if they're giving those restrictions, if they are concentrating too much power. We let them know once in a while. And I'm going to give you some examples of here that people have forgotten of times where the voters have done that. And then the last one here, it says, a democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes itself, exhausts and murders itself, because there never was a democracy that didn't commit suicide. And that's John Adams. These guys, here's my little plug for Lafayette Academy, had a classical education, so they knew the different things where different experiments had been made with government in that time period, and they looked at that and they said, okay, we know what happened in these different cases. Let's make sure we set something up that won't go down that road, which is why they did a number of different things when they set up our republic. And there's James Madison, who's considered the father of the Constitution, even though it really was a committee-led job. But he's the one that came up with the first blueprint for it, which is known as the Virginia Plan. And he said, very famously, he said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. Well, all of them at that time were very aware that men are not angels, so we're going to need a government. So how do we do this in a way that gives people rights, and yet at the same time you have order so that you can count on certain things. You can count on your property being protected. You can count on being able to follow your dream. This is why people came to the New World, the ambitious, hardworking people that said, I'm going to leave all my family and everything I know over there in Europe, and I'm going to come over here to America where I have the freedom to succeed or fail. And that's part of the whole deal. And that it's not going to be because government set up the whole setup so that I can fail and get it my way. What they need to do is protect certain rights so that I can have a chance to succeed. And that was the idea behind it. Now, what they were doing is they were following the idea of Baron de Montesquieu. I talked to the kids, and I'm not going to get into a whole government class here, but de Montesquieu is the one that said, if you're worried about tyranny, which Americans were because they had just been through it. They had just been through a monarchy that didn't give them any representation in the national parliament. So we want to make sure that this new government we set up is not just going to be a new tyranny with different people who happen to live in America. So they followed Baron de Montesquieu's rules, which said, when you're worried about having too much concentration of power in any one area, divide the power. In our case, we divided it in 3 different areas. We divided in the judicial system, whose job is to be the umpires. They look at the rule book and go, foul, okay? And are they going to make a call wrong once? Well, sure they are, because they're humans. But then you kind of learn through life and you kind of go, well, wait a minute, that didn't turn out the way we expected to. So every once in a while you reverse it. And you can do that with the judicial system that we have in the United States. The other thing you can do is you have laws that are made up. And they said, well, a legislature can be just as tyrannical as an individual or as a judge. So how do we make sure that we don't get a legislature that's tyrannical? And they had a simple answer to that: frequent elections. Or as we like to say here in America, throw the bums out, right? Now, the reality is there's about a 93% re-election rate of incumbents in this country. But that also means, and this is something, I was having a discussion with somebody earlier about a couple of people that if I said their names, you go, oh yeah, and the eyes would roll and that sort of thing. But they do represent their voters. And most of these people do, or they get thrown out. So we may look once in a while and go, Congressman so-and-so is a loony or something like that. Yes, but Congressman so-and-so is their loony. That's who they voted for. He represents their viewpoint there. So that is the beauty of that. And every 2 years in the congressman level, we get to take another look at them. And we either rehire them or we fire them. The Senate is a little different. It was part of the deal made. We're going to have a congressman to represent the population of the country. If you're like California, you're going to have 50 of them because you got a big population there. If you're in Montana, you get 1 because there's not as many people there. Well, actually, it's 2 now. They've just gotten 2 now, so they have 4 electoral votes. But the fact of the matter is, what you want to have is in the Senate, you want to have them representing the entire state. And so that's the challenge there, to make sure that they represent the entire state. And that's why certain jobs in our republic are given to the Senate. We're the only one that does this. We really have we have this Constitution that specifically states, here's what has to happen here. What's the work? We talked about what the big deal is right now. No speaker, right? Why is that a big deal? It's a big deal because only the House of Representatives can start any bill that spends federal money. Okay, so if you say, well, we want to give another 10 billion to Ukraine to fight Vladimir Putin and the Russians, that bill has to start in the House of Representatives. Guess what? It doesn't start if you don't have a speaker. You have to have somebody who can lead the whole thing, introduce it on the floor, rule on any questions, rule on any amendments, etc. That's why you have a speaker's there to run the show. He's there to run the election, the choosing, the ratification of the laws that are put forward there. So that's their specific job. The Senate, that's why they get things like approving judges. That's why they get things like, approving treaties and stuff like that, because all the states have to approve, or at least a majority, in some cases a super majority. Like if it has to be a 2/3 vote. For instance, you want a new constitutional amendment? No problem. You get 2/3 of the House of Representatives, which is a congressman, 2/3 of the Senate, which is the senators, and 3/4 of the state before anything becomes a congressional amendment. It's only been done 17 times since we had the original Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments. And 2 of them eliminate each other, prohibition and ending prohibition. So it's very hard to do that. And again, this is another thing you do in a republic. I hear from people who say, it takes them so long to do things and it drags it out. That's by design. If we're going to do something as basic as changing the Constitution, you want to make sure that a vast majority of the people are on board with that change. Otherwise, you want to stay with the rules that everyone's been working with for a while. It's got to be really obvious that, everybody, man, 3/4 of it, we agree. Need to make that change. Women should have the vote. Okay, we should have an income tax. Okay, that's the one I want to eliminate. You had to have an amendment to the Constitution. It was unconstitutional. Lincoln tried to have one during the Civil War, and they said, no, it's unconstitutional. So the 16th Amendment was what gave you an income tax. But there's a whole bunch of things that we've done throughout time. Giving 18-year-olds the vote. I know, that's another one we scratch our heads on. Does anybody remember why we gave 18-year-olds a vote? Well, that was the 26th Amendment. If you were going to go to Vietnam and fight for your country, then you had a right to be able to vote as to whether or not you thought that was a good idea. And I know a lot of us now kind of go, oh, geez, I've got an 18-year-old. I don't want to vote or something like that. But the fact of the matter is, if you're going to ask them to take on that responsibility, if you're going to give them something which could be, a critical point in their lives, then they have the right to have a say so. I mean, they're not going to, most of them don't vote anyway, but if you're going to ask them to do that, they should have the right to vote. That made sense to 3/4 of the states. And that's how it got ratified. Okay, I got to keep moving on here. I know I'm going on and on here. So the competition in these branches of government is what makes a check on the power. So each one of them has a check. The judges are nominated by the president, but they have to be approved by the Senate. The senators can approve a treaty, but the president is the one who negotiates the treaty. And the Supreme Court might say, no, you can't sign that treaty. This is a problem we're having right now. Things that are agreed to at the UN level, they're not constitutional. The Versailles Treaty was never approved by the Senate. Woodrow Wilson went over there, said, I won the war. The rest of the Europeans said, oh, there he goes again. They made this treaty. It went through the British. It went through the French. It went through the Italians. It came back to the United States, and the Senate said, we don't like this. He said, what do you mean you don't like this? I don't like this that it says in here that if Germany does something again, America has to go to war. No, our Constitution says the Congress has to declare war. President can't take us to war, and certainly some treaty we sign can't make us go to war. So these are the kinds of things that more and more you're going to see, because our republic was set up to have these constraints on the power of government and have them be made through the people, through their elected representatives who know that they're going to answer to whatever votes they make at the ballot box at some point in time. That's the accountability that is built in to the republic. Okay, that's why we have the 3 branches of government. All right, so what was assumed at the time when they set this up? And I love this quote by Benjamin Franklin. Half the truth is often a great lie. Okay, he would know. He had to deal with a lot of people. Certain assumptions were made about the citizenry of the United States of America when this republic was put forth. And Franklin had lived long enough to know that if time goes on long enough, the population changes over time. That's not necessarily bad, but it's something that you have to be mindful for. People would be ambitious. They'd want to do better. They'd want to be wealthy. They'd want to be successful. They'd want to be powerful. They'd want to be part of government. And they knew as government became more powerful, that would be important. Now, naturally, most Americans, and this is one thing I think is kind of in our national DNA, we talk about national DNA things, we like to be fair. Look at what we're going through right now. Oh, it's horrible what happened to those Israelis. But that doesn't mean we want to compensate for that with thousands of dead Gazans. How do we reconcile those two? Oh, well, we want to help them out. Yeah, but then we'll only be giving them something that now they don't have to spend money on so they can buy more rockets. We go through that as Americans, right? Every time there's a disaster, who's on the scene right away? It's the United States of America, because that's our nature. We want to be fair. We are more critical of ourselves than any other population on this planet. Believe me, it's true. And if you think that's not true, just think it through. There is a person from every single country on the planet who has come to this country and become an American. and they bring with them their experiences, their life experiences. Read Barack Obama's talk. We all think about, he grew up in Hawaii and, his father was black. Yeah, but he spent a number of years in Indonesia with his stepfather. It was a very different experience for him. And then he comes back to the United States. Who would imagine that someone like that would someday be elected president of the United States? That whole different experiences that come in there. And what did he have in common? He was an American citizen. He was able to think for himself. He was able to have the ambition that he wanted for himself. I'm not talking about him personally. I'm just using that as a very rainbow-ish, if you will, I guess I shouldn't use that word, example of the kind of thing that makes up an American. It's not our tribe, it's our ideas and ideals. All right, so Americans strive for fairness. The idea was that Americans would reject graft. It would reject people who use bribery, people who misuse their power, when they got found out, would be punished. If you look at the impeachment clause in the Constitution, one of the first things it says in there is bribery and other high misdemeanors, treason, bribery, and other misdemeanors, high crimes and misdemeanors. So they knew what the temptations would be and what the public would have to look out for. They also said we have to find a way to have government regulate itself. And that as long as the expectations of the people are in the same way, people say, no, you shouldn't make money off your position. No, you shouldn't be able to bribe. No, you shouldn't be able to commit crimes, etc. Then the government will regulate itself because people won't want to be thrown out for that. And the most important thing is there is one industry that is protected constitutionally in the United States of America, and that is the press, because of the importance of them in giving information to the people and holding people who are powerful accountable by reporting on what they're doing. And so they really felt that a protected press would guard our freedoms without ideology, because they want to make sure that things were done legally on the up and up. So what was Franklin's plan? He felt that Congress should not be paid. Said this should be a duty, you should go to Congress, should serve there, and then come home. It was part of your, being a citizen. You were a citizen, this is what you do. And many of you probably have done something like that. You served on a board without compensation. You served on a city council or a homeowners association or something like that, because it's your duty. You want the place to be nice, you want to be taken care of, you want it to be fair, you want it to be run right. You want it to be, principled in the way that it's run, okay? And the question is, if Congress was not paid, wouldn't that say to some of these people, well, I'm going to use my opportunity with knowledge and things like that to take a bribe or to self-deal my business or to graft in a situation? And so that's how he was talked out of it. Said, no, you're going to encourage people to do misdeeds if you don't pay them. So they said, okay, well, then they'll be paid from the federal treasury, which means the taxpayers will know that they are paying their salaries and they're answerable to the boss who pays their salary, which is the American citizens. And after all, it was in those days a 6-month-a-year job. And you're saying, what? Yes, it was not a full-time job because everyone was in agriculture. So Congress would convene after harvest sometime around now. That's why the Supreme Court is set up as the first Monday in October. That's after harvest season. The judges can come back now. Congress would come back. They serve October or November. They take a break in December for the Christmas time, January, February, March. Then they adjourn and go home to plant and to grow their crops, and then harvest again, and then come back. So it's a 6-month job. It was not expected to be a full-time job or a 40-year career. It has turned out that way. And I think that's one area where Franklin definitely would say, I warned you. Now today you have congressional millionaires, and this is part of the problem. The money is so big. Understand that until you had an income tax where you regularly had money coming into the federal treasury, there's only one way that money came into the federal treasury for the most part, and that was tariffs. In other words, taxes on imported goods. And what did you do with that money? For the most part, the federal government used it to keep the ports upkeep, any kind of national roads that you had, any kind of public bridges that you had. That's what you use the money for. Suddenly, at the same time you get an income tax, you get World War I comes right after that. And out of that, we're doing so well, now money is flowing in there. What are we going to do with this money? And eventually, when you have the Great Depression and you have all these needs to have all these make-work programs, those were supposed to be, an emergency situation, and things would go back to normal. And as we know, any government agency you create, you're going to have a darn hard time getting rid of it once you start it, and you're going to be expected to fund it. So all these things came out of a system that was not supposed to have that. So now today you have congressional millionaires. I don't think there's much doubt that there's insider trading going on, but the rules are different. And I think at some point in time, this is the kind of thing the press should be educating the American people about. Is there insider trading going on? Is there knowledge of proposed legislation? And not just, what are the earnings going to be like for XYZ Corporation? It's things like, for instance, the other day, okay, it's probably a few of you that use Lululemon stockings and yoga pants and that sort of stuff. Okay, they just joined the Standard & Poor's 500. The stock went up immediately 8, 10, 12 points. But I could see from the chart, I've been doing that for a while. Somebody knew, okay? And those are the kinds of things that you have to look out for. Congressional action that might happen. When a company might get approval for a drug or something like that, I see all the time. Such and such drug, went through good trials, didn't go through good trials, and you can see the stock going all like that. But some people have information about that, especially if there's a congressional committee that's involved in looking into that sort of thing. So you really have to have oversight on that. And that's the kind of thing where the press should be helping. Government sanctions. If somebody knows something's what are they doing right now? They're going after Elon Musk. Okay. Why are they going after Elon Musk? You know why they're going after Elon Musk. Elon Musk, we'll get into that in a couple of slides there. And then contract awarding is the ultimate one. And the guy that tried to warn us about that was, one of the greatest generals in American history. Remember him? Dwight Eisenhower, who warned us about the military-industrial complex. Now, what he was saying was, not so we have to worry about industries or we have to worry about the military. What he was saying is the combination was new. It was not something you typically had. For the first time, okay, let me go back to Constitution a little bit. There's a little part of the Constitution that most Americans aren't aware of, Congress people are very aware of, and that is every 2 years, you have to reapprove the Army. We never had to do that until after World War II. In fact, if you look at American history, we'd have an army, they'd fight, they'd win, they went home. And you had a very small number of soldiers left. In the 1800s, mainly to man the forts. The end of Civil War. Almost all the Civil Wars fought by volunteer units. Go to Gettysburg and Antietam like we did this summer. And everywhere you go, there's a state that's got a monument to where their volunteer unit fought at that spot on the battlefield. Civil War ends, they all go home. War of 1812, they all went home. World War I, most of them went home and took the flu with them, unfortunately. World War II is the one that's different. And that's because after World War II, we said, maybe we're going to kind of have to be aware because this Stalin guy looks like he doesn't want to take his troops out of Eastern Europe. And so that's when everything changed to having a permanent army. And so thinking about that, and the republic that they set up, and I said to you, one of the dangers was somebody who becomes very powerful. The other danger that you have in most countries that we've never had, fortunately, in this country, is a military coup. So that's why we've always had civilian control of the military. And if you want to talk to me about Mark Milley afterwards, I'm happy to talk about that situation. If you know what I'm talking about, anyway, it's a different situation. So the idea is that we need to have a reauthorization every 2 years. But after World War II, when Eisenhower is president and you've got this tremendous military, we still have bases in, I tell the kids this and they can't believe it, we still have bases in Japan. I got one of my students said, oh yeah, I know, we had one in Germany. My mom and dad served at the American military base. We don't have any German military bases in America. We don't have any Japanese bases in Alaska or Hawaii. We've still got bases. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying that wasn't in the original planning. And so you have to be very aware of how you deal with something like that because there's a tremendous interest in keeping those going. We've tried to pull some of them out of, I remember a couple of years ago, I think Wiesbaden, which is the one where wherever somebody gets badly wounded in the Middle East, they get flown up to Wiesbaden, they get fixed up there. It's a great U.S. military hospital. But a couple of times they've said, well, we think we're going to close that one and save us some money. And the people in Wiesbaden go, no, no, no. It provides a lot of employment here. Please stay. We want you to stay. And that's great to be wanted. But the fact of the matter is this military-industrial complex thing is unprecedented, as he said, in United States history. Every 2 years, you have to reauthorize the military. Every 2 years, they go through a whole process of and they're going to. They're not ever going to not reauthorize it. But the fact of the matter is you set the ground rules, what's going on there. And the kind of money that we're talking is so unusual. That's the Israeli Iron Dome, which is basically something we provided to them, and then they kind of souped it up. It's like if you took a regular Ford or a Chevy and then you had your friend, put pipes on it and bigger engine, all that sort of stuff. So the Israelis are good at doing that. But the fact of the matter is those things, when they're shooting down those Hamas missiles, it's $1 million a missile, or the Iron Dome. And so that's a lot of money. And so over time, nobody else makes it but one contractor. So, you kind of watch the process and go, okay, well, make sure that you're not overcharging us there. But the fact of the matter is it's a lot of money. And with the amount of money, there's going to be a lot of influence. Congressman so-and-so is going to want to make sure that the plant that's making those $1 million missiles is going to continue to make those $1 million missiles because it employs people in his district. I'm not saying that's bad. That's kind of the way the system works. And in many ways, it's working in the interest of the voters. What I'm saying is that we need to make sure that we see the big picture all the time. And someday, people say, we got $33 trillion of debt. How are we going to pay it off? We're not going to try to pay off. You don't want to try to pay it off. One of the first things in our nation's history is Alexander Hamilton took all the state debts from the Revolutionary War and put them together and said, now it's United States federal government debt. And people in my class and the kids used to say, why would you want to do that? Because if you're the one who's paying the interest on that debt from the federal government, that makes the federal government more powerful, which is what Hamilton wanted to do. It gave them credibility. It was the newest government around. The state governments have been around since colonial days. The federal government, people weren't sure that it was going to work out. Now, what happens here is you start getting stuff that you get the influence that happens when you have a contract with that, when you have a plant like that, when you have the same, there isn't competition. When you have what we've had in the last 20 years, which is tremendous consolidation of the industries that make up those high-tech weapons. When you look at a Lockheed and you look at General Dynamics and some of these other, and we need them, and they do great work. But a lot of them have consolidated over time to keep the costs down, and that makes them very influential because they're the only ones that can make that particular item. Okay. Now, what we're seeing right now in the wake of COVID, and it bears watching by the American public, is a medical industrial complex. Who's putting together the vaccines? What kind of testing have they gone through? Can you rely on the people who say, this is the results that we've gotten, that sort of thing? And of course, that's much more individual. That's right down to the personal level for each person that's taken those vaccines or that's using those treatments or that's counting on the government have done due diligence. I just got through talking with the middle school kids about Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt is the man who put together the Pure Food and Drug Act, which created the Pure Food and Drug Administration. And out of that, eventually is going to come the different things like the CDC and some of the other ones that we got used to during COVID time. So you really need to watch the influences on these medical policies. Are there people who are profiting off of that? I'm not going to get personal here. You know the names that I would be throwing out here if I wasn't concerned about that. But I think there will continue to be investigation as to whether or not decisions were made by people at higher ends of government, not knowing that the people who are advising them had a stake in what was going on, or had some influence on what was going on, or had an opportunity to benefit in what's going on. And that's something, again, that the American people need to be kept in touch on by an unbiased press, by a press that is not going to be ideological. So let's talk about them a little bit. They're very important to this process. Voters count on information they get. Americans are not, we think we're very political. We're not. We're busy living our lives. We're trying to raise children, we're trying to build a home. We're trying to, make a successful business. And so we have to be able to count on our press to be given us a fair reading on the information we need to know what's going on. So the press is critical in our system, and voters need balanced information. And the press are needed to shine a light on problems and corruption. I used to teach this in my government class years ago. You need a watchdog press, not a lapdog press. I need to know when the press reports something that I'm being given their best estimation of what's going on, that they're going to dig regardless of their political orientation, regardless of their ideology. I need to be able to count on that. And the American people in our process of elections needs to count on that. And this is something that's going on. What's gone on the last couple of days is a perfect example of that. To have someone like, and I'm going to use names in this case, the New York Times immediately buys into the accusation by Hamas that this hospital was hit by an Israeli airstrike and that 500 people died. And it turned out that we got the video. It was a Hamas rocket that went bad. It didn't even hit the hospital. It hit the parking lot out there. And we don't know how many people were killed because it was a parking lot. And there were some cars, and I'm sure there probably was some people hurt, but it probably wasn't 500 people out in that parking lot. And so why would you have someone like the New York Times say, well, this is what's going on. Here's what the Israelis say. It's unclear to us. We're not able to make a judgment. As opposed to several times when even the President of the United States has said, I've seen the information on the butcheries going on there. And some people say, well, some news sources say that could be artificial intelligence. We don't know that really happened. And we can't even trust the pictures if they show us the pictures. So journalism was supposed to be a way and a means of getting to the truth. Unfortunately, in most journalism schools around today, it is not. Journalism is now a means of activism for an ideology. And it's not just one ideology. There are schools that teach it to have an axe to grind on either side. But the fact of the matter is the American people are now in a situation where we go, we can't trust our press. If you've seen the numbers in the polling data, I mean, I don't care what political person is having a problem. Nobody's got as bad polling numbers in this country as the American press does. And that's not good for our republic. We need to be able to count on the information they give us. So now, over the last year or so, we've had some interesting things happen in this. Elon Musk purchased Twitter. Does anybody remember why Elon Musk decided to purchase Twitter? When the Babylon Bee, a satire and humor site, was banned by Twitter. And that for him was, that was it. When that happened, he said, that's it. I'm going to buy Twitter and I'm going to see what I can do to fix it. Now, a lot of people said, you're going to lose your money. He spent $40 billion for it. But if you're worth $350 billion, you can spend $40 billion. He said, free speech, you can't put a price on it. So that's why he bought Twitter. And then he wasn't there very long. He said, okay, I'm going to dig in the files here and see what I find out. And how many of you in this group, you probably know what's been in the Twitter files. I can guarantee you 80 to 90% of the public has no idea what was in the Twitter files. A U.S. appeals court has ruled in a case which actually, we're on the headline, I think it's Missouri versus, I forget who is the opponent for the government. But anyway, it ruled in Missouri's favor because before he became a senator, Josh Hawley filed a case about him, accusing them of collaborating with the federal government, Twitter, to censor people. Okay, Twitter can do what they want. They are not a government entity unless the government saying, we want you to silence that guy. And Twitter says, we're on it, and they do it. And that's exactly what was happening. So he started publishing the information of that. So that's the people who were doing this was Matt Taibbi, who is a former Rolling Stone writer, not exactly your right-wing zealot, and Barry Weiss, who used to work at the New York Times. And so they thought, well, of course, if we have people like that, people are going to listen to it and read it and see that it's and that hasn't. All they've done is gone after Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss. But that's okay, because over time, eventually, people will begin to find out. It leads you to the question, will the press police itself? Everyone has been proven to their satisfaction now that the Russian collusion accused that the media had done for years against President Trump was untrue. So what about the Pulitzers that were given to CNN and others on the reporting they did on the Russian collusion hoax? Are they going to give them back? Of course not. And they should. The New York Times still will not give back the Pulitzer that was won by Walter Duranty, who reported on how great things were going in the Soviet Union and how wonderful communism was doing in the Soviet Union, when he knew full well that millions were starving to death in places like, wait for it, Ukraine, okay, during that period of time. So at some point in time, the press is going to have to start policing itself. And so right now the press has been, well, if it's not something that's against the First Amendment, we don't have to worry about it. But if the government is telling social media that it's their job to censor something, or it's their job to delete someone's account, it's their job to suspend somebody's account because the government tells them to do it, that is still government censorship and thus is against the First Amendment. The Washington Post, ever since the election of 2016, has had this little thing, democracy dying in darkness. This is the kind of thing where things die in darkness. And oh, by the way, if you haven't figured out already for tonight, they need to change that to a republic dies in darkness. But there's something just very appealing about saying the word democracy, even though it's not what we have. If you don't have blind justice and balanced news in the United States, you get things like this. Now, the head of ISIS was targeted by the United States government. If you remember, this was a group that was filmed beheading innocent people, and including, amazingly enough, journalists. And the journalists were complaining about that. So then how do you get a situation like it is down here on the right hand of the screen, when the United States hit Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, a leader of ISIS, and killed him? The obituary in the New York Times says, austere religious scholar at helm of Islamic State dies at 48. No, he was a terrorist leader of ISIS, and he was taken out with a missile at 48. And so at first, when the first version of it came over the internet, it said on there, the terrorist in chief. Somebody complained, and that's why they changed it to austere religious scholar. Who is it that the media is placating? They shouldn't be placating anybody. They should be reporting the news. And that way, the people will have the information they need to make their judgment. We today have a two-tier system of justice. It has become based on your tribal affiliation. Can Donald Trump get and I'm not saying whether he's guilty or not. That's for a jury to decide. But can he get a fair jury in New York, in DC, in Atlanta? In DC, he got 7% of the vote. What are the chances they're going to be able to find a couple of jurors who will vote on what they see on evidence and not, oh boy, I'm going to throw Donald Trump in jail because I don't like him? That's not our way of doing things. Will a jury be able to keep ideology out? Will the press have pumped them up to want to do that and become famous that way? Another example is that Hunter Biden's laptop right before the election. And the whole question was, well, we had 51 people who were intelligence people who signed a letter, said, this looks to us like Russian disinformation. Where's the accountability for that? How bad is it that they still won't rescind that? And finally, the fact that Hunter Biden is suing the guy who took his laptop and gave it to the FBI and saying, I want my laptop back. But if it was Russian disinformation, why would he want his laptop back? I mean, nobody's asking that question. I shouldn't say nobody. Our media should be asking that question. And then finally, the jury in the George Floyd case. And one of the things was interesting right before that jury came out there is the guy, they had a guy on one of the news things that was talking about the medical evidence. And one of the key things he was saying, he said, look, maybe this guy was excessive in his force, but calling it murder when the guy had a lethal amount of fentanyl in his body when he was arrested should be, accounting for something in the case of the trial. And then in the end, he said, but I don't expect this jury to acquit him. I think they're going to convict him. And why are they going to convict him? Because those people got doxxed on the jury. Everybody know what doxxed means? That's when they get your information. You're supposed to be anonymous when you're on a jury, but they dox people these days. If you're protesting something, you're accounting for something, you need to be able to, you feel, remain anonymous to be safe. If they release your information on social media, that's called getting doxxed. And that jury got doxxed. There wasn't a single member of that jury that would have felt safe saying, no, there's not enough evidence to convict or enough evidence for a murder conviction. maybe for a manslaughter conviction or something like that. That should not be happening. And a lot of reason that's happening is because the media is torquing people up in some of these cases. And that bothers me. So a citizen needs to feel confidence in their voting systems. We had changes in the balloting in the 2020 election because of COVID. You had states that went by the wayside of what their state constitution said would have to happen in order to change it. They just went ahead and changed it anyway. Now, what you have to have happen is somebody has to challenge that. And that can be expensive, and time is of the essence when you're talking about voting. But there's a number of states where the voting changed. So you had a lack of security in some of these states. You had a mail-in without request. That's not legal in a lot of these states. Ballot harvesting is legal in some states, not in others. Everybody know what ballot harvesting is? In California, they're really good at it. They'll go to an apartment complex, especially one where a lot of people are constantly moving out, 3 months in, 6 months out, whatever. And those ballots get mailed out there, and they will harvest them out of the mailboxes. They'll go to people and say, did you get your ballot? Yeah, I'm a such and such party person. Will you turn it over to me? Oh, sure. And then they go ahead and they fill it out for them, okay? That person's not voting. Now, if the states made that legal, then the legislature's made that legal. But people don't know that that's going on. And I'm not sure that if they did, they would approve that. So in some cases, it's violating a state constitution. It's certainly a lack of transparency if they're not telling people what's going on. And it looks squirrely. You have situations that you did on the night of the 2020 election where suddenly people were putting cardboard up so you couldn't watch them count or something like that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they were doing something illegal or improper, but it sure made you say, why are they doing that? Because I can't see what ballots they're counting from over here. Why are they doing that? And so voters, and particularly, we are suspicious people. We go, what's going on? That should be out in the open. So even if it's legitimate, here's the key to why American republicanism, the small r, has worked, is because the voters accept the results if the losers feel the process is fair. And we've all been there. Well, I voted for so-and-so, but they lost. Well, that's the way the system is. You got the majority of votes, they're going to be the ones that they're being elected, and I accept that. But if you start to think that something went wrong and something's not right, and everyone's calling you out or prosecuting you for saying that, then you start to think, okay, something's wrong. And so we need to change that. So only when the voter, the loser, knows that the process was fair, then they accept the loss, then we move on. That's what we've always done as Americans. And that's where I'm joking here. I said, perhaps we need Iraq's blue fingers. You everybody remember when Iraq got their first vote? And so once you voted, you dipped your finger in that blue ink, and that blue ink stood on your finger for about a week. So you couldn't vote more than once. Nobody voted more than once in Iraq. Maybe we need to do that here. Go back to paper ballot and blue fingers and all that sort of stuff. And people would trust the process. You go, okay, we lost fair and square. That's all we care about. If you lose, but you want it to be fair and square. We're also a nation, as a republic, that needs borders. You can't have a nation be a nation if they don't have borders that are respected. Now, the United States, again, as I said, is unique. There is someone from everywhere in the world that has become an American. And we are proud of the inclusion in our citizenry makeup. And people say, oh, we're a racist country. No, we're not. We paid 600,000 lives to get rid of slavery. We went through years and years of marching. I show it to my kids every year. I show them the civil rights movement, Brown the Board of Education, Dr. King and the bus strike, and all the things that went through it. And that's citizens that did that. It's not some dictator that handed that down. It was the citizens that did that. And we are proud of that. But at the same time, when you become a citizen, you have an equal stake opportunity in what's going on. And you have skin in the game. You become a taxpayer. And that's part of the system that has to happen here. We're happy to help people, to give them a leg up, because everyone's got someone probably in their background. I know I tell the kids about my great-grandfather with a German accent who got beat up in Central Park because he had a German accent in 1917. Okay, wasn't fair, but he loved being in America. He knew it was so much better. And so you need to use the system. You need to be fair about it. It needs to be controlled. Immigration is the name of this country's history, but we need to have people at the door take and roll. making sure that you're going to be a contributing member if you're going to get all the benefits of living in this country. And right now, we feel like there's some people say, hey, look, if we don't like the results of the last election, we'll just change the voters. We'll just import ones that will thank us for bringing them in, and we'll get our benefit that way. And that feels like a sucker's game. And Americans don't like to be suckers. We like to be generous, as I said earlier, but we don't like to be suckers. We like to feel that it's been a fair game. That's why the big deal about the voting. We want to make sure that it's a fair game and not being done unfairly. So here we come to the end. I know, bless your hearts, you've been hanging in there. So what can Americans do? Politicians watch elections. Do not kid yourself. Once in a while you hear, it's like, okay, recently, last weekend, anybody know what happened? There was an election in a southern state. It went from one party to another. In Louisiana, they got a Republican governor that had a Democratic governor before. No one expected that. Louisiana is one of those states. Every state's different. This is what actually, this is one of the things I love about America. Every state has its own way of doing things, because we were individual states before we got together and became the United States. So down there, they have what's called the jungle primary. Everybody that wants to be governor can run for governor. And you have to have one person gets over 50%, or you have a runoff, okay? And no one, in Louisiana, it's always a runoff. It's like 8 people running 10%, 3%, 5%, and the number one person gets 41. So you take the top 2 and they have a runoff. Guy got 50%. They're all going, why did that happen? Gee, I don't know. Could it be inflation? Could it be immigration? All the things that we talk about when we say these things we want fixed. Politicians pay attention to that, even the small ones, especially ones where something changes in an area that usually votes a certain way. So here's what I'm saying to you. If you're not happy about what's going on, get involved. That's what Americans do. And I can say that because I licked all those envelopes in 1968, and then they threw junk at my door in 1972. You need to get involved. And the best place really to get involved is not, I'm going to help Congressman so-and-so or Senator so-and-so. No. Get involved at the local level. Find out about who's on your city council. Find out who's on your board of aldermen. Run for your person that's got your homeowners association going, and maybe there's a tyrant in Florida. I used to live there. That's happening all the time. We call them the condo commandos. School board meetings. This is the big area we're fighting right now, guys. And this is me giving a little plug for Lafayette Academy too. The people that have their children here are paying for their children to get a good education that should be happening with their tax money, but it's not. They're being actually, and this is the other thing, it's the big issues, I'm telling you, the winning candidates in the next election, the ones who are going to talk about parents' rights, they're going to talk about what's going on in the schools and what's being taught in the schools. They're going to be taught about whether or not they're listening to the voters. And if they're not, the voters will talk at the ballot box. And so go to those school board meetings, find out what's going on, run for local government. And some of these people might end up, that you're voting for, supporting, could end up in DC sometime. And so you're in the beginning of their training, they're corporals and they're sergeants. We've been watching Band of Brothers again. So I watch Dick Winters go from second lieutenant all the way up to Major Winters, and it's kind of neat. But they're going to be advanced. If they're doing a good job, they're going to get up there. And it's also a chance to sift out the phonies. When you talk to them, you go and talk to them face to face. You'll walk away and say, I really like that guy. I'm going to support him. Or you go, that guy's a phony. I know that's not what it's about. And so, this is where you get involved. Get involved in your party primaries. Anyone know who this is? This is one of the most famous surprises out of an election primary. Nobody still knows? That's Eric Cantor, who was majority leader in the House and lost in his primary. His fellow Republicans threw him out. Majority leader of the House is the number 2 position. That's what Steve Scalise is right now, okay? So you get in a situation like this, you get into primaries, 93% of the incumbents win, but every once in a while, you look at somebody and go, I don't know what's going on here. He was soft on immigration. He thought people didn't think it was a big issue. The people in New Jersey, the Republicans in New Jersey, thought it was. And so they threw him out in favor of somebody else who was harder on immigration. So that's the kind of thing that will send a message. And you want to, more than any podcast you listen to, more than any TV show you watch to, more than any other person that you listen to. All right, I'm going to read you what Teddy Roosevelt said here. He said, the death knell of the republic had rung as soon as the active power became lodged in the hands of those who sought not to do justice to all citizens, rich and poor alike, but to stand for one special class and for its interest as opposed to the interest of others. Now, I always like Teddy Roosevelt stuff because he's considered a traitor to his class. He was wealthy. And what did he do? He went after wealthy people when he was governor of New York. In fact, they said, okay, all the crooked, wealthy people, not all more crooked, but the ones who were crooks, who were wealthy, wanted to get Theodore Roosevelt out of the governorship in New York. And so when Vice President Hobart died and McKinley had to look for a new running mate, they said, put Theodore Roosevelt on him, they'll take away all his power and they'll solve all our problem in New York and we'll be happy. And they did. Nobody thought McKinley would get shot 6 months later and that Roosevelt would become president of the United States. And he spent a lot of his time going after the big trust, going after J.P. Morgan and Standard Oil of California and Standard Oil of America and all these other places. So that's a big important part. Theodore Roosevelt knew what he's talking about. The republic had to go after these powerful interests to be the interest of the people. Okay, last slide. What does this require of its citizens? While Americans hate politics, we must do a better job of knowing what's happening. And that's painful sometimes. Sometimes that's really hard. And sometimes you go, I just don't think I can listen to this anymore. But the fact of the matter is that some of these things are really key. The big one right now, as I said before, is the parents' rights movement. It's why you have a Republican governor in Virginia, because he made that his issue. And that crosses party lines. People say, well, we got to pull together as a country. The right issues will do that. Every parent wants their kid to get a good education. That's why we have almost 80 people here, as Mrs. McKinney said, here at Lafayette Academy, because those parents want their kids to have a good education. And so the parents' rights movement is a big deal. You have the right to know what your school's curriculum is, regardless of what the teachers' union says. And by the way, that's the teachers' union. That's not the same as the teachers. The individual teachers, especially the ones who've been experienced, know what's going on, and they're on your side. They'd like to see it change. We have some of them working for us now, okay? So you have the opportunity and the obligation, even if you're, okay, most of us, I look around in here, your exception, obviously, are grandparents, okay? We care about what our grandchildren are getting taught. I got one of my grandchildren here. When I get a hug from her every day, and I know that she's learning things and she's learning good things. She knows how to read chapter books. She has a great vocabulary, and it's all, she's been here for several years now. And it's just great to see what's going on there. So remember, they are spending your tax money. Don't let them tell you, oh, parents shouldn't have any right to say anything. That's what got his opponent, gosh, his name's, somebody knows his name. Say again? Yes, Youngkin. Thank you very much. That's how he won. Because his opponent said, well, parents shouldn't have the right to determine what the school curriculum is. And the parents went, what? Excuse me? It's our tax money? Of course we do. This is America. This is not the Soviet Union. So, special update, okay? I'll try to make this as quick as possible. We had talked about this, what's going on, Hamas, Israel, and the world situation. As you know, the president was there. Good for him to show the flag and to call out Hamas for what they were. That's a good thing. I think the Israelis are going to kind of take a pause here. When you got a situation like this where the other side is expecting you to attack any day now, the longer you wait, the more that they may slip up. And I think right now what they're doing a lot of is gathering intelligence. They've been watching these tunnels being built for years. They know where they are. They don't necessarily know what's in them. I have a feeling they may have some technology that'll give them some ideas. So what you want to do is you want to hit the one that's full of missiles, and you don't want the one that's got a bunch of children, huddling in a corner or something like that. But eventually, they're going to have to. The challenge that Israel is going to have is the minute they do that, there's a good possibility that Hezbollah will attack from the north out of Lebanon. They've basically made Lebanon, southern Lebanon, their own little country. And both of them, both Hamas and Hezbollah, are financed by the United States. Why do I say that? Because we gave billions of dollars to Iran, and not just the $6 billion that we've been talking about lately. We've been giving them money for a long time. So at some point in time, And I think hopefully this will be part of the debate in the election. We'll talk about trying to appease Iran the same way business people in the late 1930s tried to appease Germany through German business interests. So if they attack Hamas, I'm sure they're keeping a very tight look at what's going on with Hezbollah on the northern border. Hezbollah has 100,000 missiles, not a couple thousand like the Hamas does. They have 100,000 missiles. And Israel's not a big country, guys. It's about the size of New Hampshire. Kind of looks like it too in its shape. And so it's not very difficult to hit just about any part in Israel you want to if you've got a missile with any accuracy. So where is this all going to come out? Right now, the two governments that are happiest that this has happened in a way are Russia and China, because people aren't paying as much attention to whatever's going on in Ukraine. In fact, we saw more footage coming out of Israel on the first day of that attack than we had in months worth of the war going on in Ukraine. Why is that? This is the time to ask yourself the question. Why are the American reporters all in there showing what's going on, how horrible the Russians are, and how we need to send them billions of dollars more? We're just hearing about the billions of dollars. We're not finding out what's going on. I'm not necessarily accusing anybody, but those kinds of things should make you go, I wonder why that's happening. And China in particular, like all of them, how do I say this? It's no secret that we have a president in his 80s. Regardless of whether you agree with his policy or not, he's in his 80s. His chief rival is almost there too. And if I'm Russia, if I'm China, looking at Taiwan, if I'm Hamas, if I'm Hezbollah, if I'm Iran, I've got an opportunity to take advantage of that situation. And you're hoping that we've got enough of a leadership infrastructure to be able to keep us informed of what's going on and be able to make the right decisions in a very squirrely time right now. So anyway, that's kind of just a quick 5-minute thumbnail of what's going on in the Middle East and how it not only affects that, it affects what's going on in Ukraine. We're running out of supplies of our weaponry. And some people are saying, we may need that ourselves. Do the Israelis need them? Is Taiwan going to need them going against China? It's just a really good time to be on top of things and write your congressman and senator. Don't write Senator so-and-so who's the head of the committee, but he's from Rhode Island. That goes in the circular file, okay? They'll read the ones that are from their districts or their states if they're a senator. And if more people do that, it will have an impact, because the one thing that most politicians want to do is get reelected. And so we're the ones that essentially are their bosses, and we can give them an idea as to what we think should happen in some of these cases. Now, I was asked to, after this quick little update, is there an interest here? And people online, this is for you too. Is there an interest here in, say, the next 2 or 3 weeks and having one specifically addressing the history of the Middle East and what's going on these days? If so, raise your hand. Okay. And don't feel badly if you didn't raise your hand. Okay, so pretty much all the hands here. I don't know what kind of response you got there. And I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah.
How many missiles does Israel have?
Well, that's a good question. For the most part, Israel doesn't use missiles for offensive purposes, it's just for the defensive purpose. And we're worried about that. There's a reason why they're not telling us how many they have. Because if the other side says, I got 2,000 missiles left, then we keep shooting at them until they run out of those 2,000 missiles. So I don't know how many they have. But I do know from what you hear, correspondents who do really follow this and get into depth, that they're worried about some of their supplies if there's a protracted war with Hamas. And guys, that's going to happen. This is the Alamo for Israel. People said years ago, if Israel, if the Hamas put down their weapons, there would be peace. If the Israelis put down their weapons, there'd be no Israel. And they know that. And they mean it when they say never again. Never again are they're gonna surrender. Yes, you had a question.
What are your thoughts on China buying up land?
Yeah, you've got, I can't remember who it was. Somebody may remind me here it was, but one of the governors recently, I think it was Abbott in Texas, said, no, we're ending this. We're not doing this anymore. and cutting that off. I will say one thing. I remember when we went through the 80s, the Japanese had bought Rockefeller Center and they'd bought Pebble Beach and a couple other things. And people go, the Japanese are buying up our land. I go, no big deal. Because at some point in time, they got to sell it back. They're buying it because they think you can make a profit on it someday. But what you're talking about here with China is something different. I think we're so used to seeing, excuse me, made in China and things. We kind of think, well, you know, they make a lot of our stuff and it keeps things cheap. And, you know, I've met a few of them. They seem nice. But that's not the Chinese Communist Party. And they run everything. I told the kids the other day, I was telling them about stop using TikTok. You're letting them use all your information. They go, well, I don't care, you know, because they're 12. And what do the Chinese want with their information? Well, you know, I didn't have time to get into a deep thing. I'm just saying, someday you'll be saying, I wish I hadn't let the Chinese find out all this information. So I think you're going to see, especially when we get close to election time, there will be some very visible actions by some governors saying, we're not allowing this anymore, or we're going to unwind those situations. It's their choice of land that made it really squirrely. Oh, it's right near an army base. Gee, I wonder why they would buy that land or something like that. So, you know, just what is the old thing that Reagan used to quote, the old Russian phrase, trust but verify. I don't think there's a lot of trust there. The Chinese government believes they're playing the long game, that this is their century, and by the end of the century, they'll be the dominant world power. And there's a certain amount of Americans say, well, what's the big deal on that? Oh yeah, it will. This is, you know, they're not a democracy. They're not a republic, even though they call themselves the People's Republic. Well, we know those are false words. Words mean nothing to them. So I agree with you. That's something to be aware of. And I'm hoping that election time, you'll see other governors take some kind of move like that. Got any questions there online? They probably say, just turn him off. He's been on talk long enough. Okay, well, we'll let you know if we decide to do something on the Middle East. I think it's going to be a very interesting next number of weeks, and I pray. That's what I do. You do what works for you. I'm going to pray. Thank you for coming tonight.